I'm here with Jill Delston, who is a philosophy professor at UMSL. Hi, Jill. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me to your awesome YouTube program.
Oh, you're swell. The Ethics of Precision Health. I just read your paper and I have some questions.
Great.
It's under the umbrella of bioethics, and I know bioethics is a field, but medical ethics is a field. So, what exactly is the field in which this paper is written? What's bioethics?
Yeah, it's this pursuit of values and, the good when it comes to research in medicine. So I want to create a bigger umbrella than just medical ethics with this paper because I also want to think about the sort of moral dilemmas that arise in research and research that impacts human health. So bioethics, biomedical ethics, these are ways of creating a bigger sort of umbrella to talk about the ways that research and medicine can both create moral dilemmas for us.
So, you're talking about like medical science. You're also talking about the actual treatment of patients. What what does a philosopher have to do in this conversation between the medical scientist and the medical practitioner and medicine? Like, what's the philosopher doing in the room?
Yeah, I think it's so important to think about what the philosopher is doing in the room because a lot of what we're looking for when we go to a doctor with a sort of medical problem with symptoms that we're experiencing is something to do with our values. I really like running, and when I run, it hurts. I used to be able to do XYZ and I can't anymore. And so we all have these goals, these functions that are important parts of our lives. And, two different patients might experience the same health setback, but have very different reactions to it because of their very different lives. So values and priorities are always there in the doctor's office. They're always there in medical research. But if they are present and we don't think about them, or we don't think about how they influence our decisions, then we could end up making mistakes, or making the wrong choices. And so the philosophy is already present, but given that it's there, let's think about that. Let's think about the consequences or eventualities that arise from that.
In the middle to end of your paper, you have a list that you call like a case study of experiments that have been done, treatments that have been given that have just gone poorly, that you're calling like medical abuse, unethical actions that have happened. You cite the Tuskegee study somewhere in the middle. So, in my mind, what your paper is doing is criticizing how some medical science has been done and then giving us a better alternative with a better definition that would decrease cases like the Tuskegee study experiment happening in the future. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right. A lot of us have great intentions when it comes to the pursuit of medicine or science, but we can still go astray even with the best intentions. So I really want to examine how we can prevent those abuses from occurring, in the most neutral way and the most accessible way possible.
So you talk about the 2015 or so Obama White House speech. That's how you like start the paper. Here's this president promising Americans that there's this new advancement. And is that what's called precision health? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
exactly.
And you're going to take this idea of precision health and you're going to criticize it. Can
Mhm.
you tell us, I think you were used the word like stratification, so definitely explain that. But like what is the thing that you think needs rethinking?
Right. So precision health exactly has to do with this idea of stratification, creating groups. That's all it means. So when like sometimes when people talk about precision health, they talk about personalized medicine or individualized medicine. That's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to just create a medical intervention that only works for one person out of billions. But we can certainly tailor our medical interventions and our research to small groups. And that's what stratification allows us to do. It create those small groups and create some sort of medical intervention that works particularly for you. So with the Obama administration, they were really interested in democratizing these new medical advances of precision health. How can we make sure that, yeah, of course, we want to follow the science wherever it goes and see that we can tailor medical interventions to the individual, but how can we ensure that this is widely accessible? So right off the bat, as it sort of meets the public eye, already we're concerned about equity and equal access.
And don't you make the pretty strong case that this whole precision health thing is not aligned with the scientific method,
Mm,
right? Can you tell us more about that? I guess I'm asking you to explain more the problem with this precision health. It's like missing something scientific while at the same time saying it's like following the science. Can you help explain that?
yeah, I'm worried about it. I'll just say that. There are so many ways to do precision health well and do it in the right way. But I'm worried about falling astray from that sort of ideal or goal. So yeah, one way that I criticize it is I argue that in some examples of precision health, we are tailoring it to the individual. We're coming up with a biological characteristic or an identifiable characteristic, even if it's not biological. Maybe it's social or cultural or part of the social determinants of health. But we're targeting something, right? And then we're saying, okay, this intervention will work for anybody with that target. And so that's how I think precision health ought to go. But sometimes I argue it goes a different way, where first we group people and we just say, oh, everybody of this race or everybody of this gender. And then we try and see what's going on with them. Is there anything going on with them? And I worry about going in the other direction, because if we group people first or stratify people first, and then we try and target, we can end up sort of creating stigma or creating injustice or causing exploitation where there wouldn't have been otherwise. So precision health can be done. It's often done really, really well. I just want to be super clear about how the best way to do it is.
You offer a whole new like model for understanding this and definition of what would make good medical um, science and treatment turn into excellent medical science and treatment. And you cite one thing. I want to read this. It's from page 442, and the definition that you defend is better than what most medical people are doing because it doesn't require individualization, but it permits individualization. Why is that a benefit, or why is that important to be able to individualize but not be required to individualize?
Well, I think one of the reasons is just that individualization turns out to be really hard from a scientific perspective. We are 99% genetically similar, human beings are, and we have all these different similarities. And so possibly if you think about all the different types of differences that can arise between two humans, you can get somebody who's exactly their own unique sort of uh, uh, instance of a human being. But for the most part, when we think about these health interventions, what we want to do is tailor it to the individual. Maybe like, what if I could give you a diet that was perfectly suited to your microbiome? Or what
Mm.
if give you a medicine that was perfectly suited to your genome? Or what if I could target your unique version of a cancer tumor, right? Then I could come up with an intervention that's really, really successful, has better results than something that's a one size fits all intervention. But it's unlikely it would just work for you. It would work for anybody with your type of biome or anybody with your
Sure.
makeup or anybody with your type of cancer. So we want to walk that line of making the most successful, most avant-garde, most scientifically advanced medical interventions, but also insofar as they work for other people, we want to be able to apply them broadly. And one of the problems with, I argue, like grouping people first and then seeing if we can come up with a target later is we get this black box kind of result where we don't know why the intervention worked because we don't have a target in mind. And that becomes, it's harder to build on that science. It's harder to figure out who that science applies to. There are all kinds of problems that arise.
And you're not testing a hypothesis, which is the scientific method.
Right.
And then that's a problem.
Exactly.
That
So,
makes clear.
yeah. You mentioned the Tuskegee syphilis study. This was a study done long ago that
Tell us about it.
it was, it was just focused on African Americans, right? So the hypothesis was that syphilis advances differently in this racial category, this population, than in other racial categories. And so the scientists imagined, well, if, more Black people are dying from syphilis, then maybe there's some biological difference that underlies that. It's racist, but people thought that there was a biological basis for race back then. And so they took a group of people, who had syphilis and they wanted to follow them and see what happened. The problem was they didn't have a target in mind. They had no idea what racial, characteristic. It was probably not melanin, right, that was influencing the advancement of syphilis in the population. So they had no control. They weren't comparing two racial categories. They had no way of comparing it to other people. They had no target. They had no way to build on anything that arose from it. And so they could have actually disproven, as we now have, that there is a biological basis for race, but they didn't design the experiment correctly. And so I think that we, by sort of staying on the true and narrow when it comes to the scientific method, we can actually prevent those sorts of ethical abuses.
You talk about preventing the ethical abuses like the stigma thing, the exploitation thing. You talk about all these benefits to your way of looking at precision health in this very short and clear paper. Who would argue against you, and what could they even say?
Mm. I think that a danger or an opponent that I might have in mind is a scientist who wants like a shortcut, right? They want to they get these patients in their office. They don't know why a disease progresses differently in one group than another. I talk about the VBAC calculator, the calculator that helps us determine whether a vaginal birth in a patient who has already had a cesarean will be successful. And they see, well, wait a minute, this is, VBACs are not equally successful across racial categories. So they're like, oh no, this is a problem. We should do something about this. We should even write down the fact that VBACs are less successful in non-white populations and then proceed accordingly. Well, the danger there is that they are grouping patients first with no particular target in mind and not realizing that maybe the reason why VBACs are not as successful in certain racial populations than others is because of the discrimination that those people experience in the doctor's office. So there's this kind of weird result, that VBACs are not equally successful across all people. But that result, I want to sort of push us away from even talking about, right? Like, no, let's think about successful VBACs and unsuccessful VBACs and what differences occurred there. And then we can realize, there were different interventions. There was, different blood pressure in the populations. There was different whatever. And then, anybody with high blood pressure might be recommended to do one intervention rather than another, instead of anybody of a racial category who may or may not have high blood pressure. So the idea is that scientists are seeing what's in front of them. We all have these social categories in mind as we go about our day. That's not necessarily bad, but when it comes to the medicine and science, let's be as precise as possible.
And someone who would object to what you're saying is likely trying to do less thinking, less work, less hypothesizing, less testing their hypotheses, and trying to take a shortcut.
Yeah, I think a lot of these shortcuts, that's what I'm trying to argue against. Yeah, I mean, there are some examples of people like trying to fish for associations, like, ooh, I've got a lot of data. What kind of associations can arise from this? But that's not really the scientific method. That's actually a recipe for finding correlations that have no causal basis, like shark attacks go up
Mm.
when ice cream sales go up. There's an association there, but we don't think there's a causal relationship. So if we don't hypothesize first and then go to the data, and we instead just fish around for relationships, then yeah, it looks like a shortcut, but actually it can lead us astray.
You're saying it would lead us astray only because you care about the well-being of all people. Is that true? If someone was like happy marginalizing the poor, say, then they wouldn't care that they're doing shortcuts. The shortcuts are a problem if we care about everybody. Is
Ooh,
is
yeah,
that true?
good question. Um, so I, of course, want to appeal to the people who already think equity is valuable, and
Okay.
already believe that we should avoid exploitation and stigma and inequity. But I also want to appeal to the people who don't even care about equity at all, and who are not concerned about treating all patients equally. And I want to say to those people, hey, you know, actually, you're going to get worse scientific results by taking your approach instead of the ethical one. And I'll say that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is what we were talking about with, data fishing, coming up with correlations instead of causal relationships. That's going to lead to bad interventions.
Can you explain that one a little bit further?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So
Causal correlate, like what was that?
So like if we have the if we're treating different patients differently based on their race, right? We might say that this disease works differently in one race than another. And but also it's true that race has no biological basis. So we don't when we say the disease progresses differently in one race rather than another, we're not pointing to any sort of genetic basis for that claim. There's going to be another basis for that claim, like access to healthcare or pre-existing conditions or discriminatory medical doctors. And so the worry is that we'll come up with a correlation, like a common cause,
I see.
instead of a causal relationship. So it's being of a particular race isn't causing the disease to progress differently. It's just correlated with the degrees of
I
the
see.
disease.
Okay, so that's your first point.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So another thing that I think that can happen when we do the science better is that we can reach a bigger population of individuals. So we can actually ensure that that the all and only the patients who need the intervention are getting it.
Oh, like your cancer example.
Yeah.
Okay, can you explain this one a little bit more? That was a really interesting part of your paper.
So these are BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations, are mutations that lead to these very aggressive forms of breast cancer. And so the thinking is, oh, look, if we were just to group people first, maybe women are more likely um, to be susceptible to breast cancer than men or something like that, then we wouldn't capture the right sort of people. But if
Yeah.
it's in mind and we're able to pursue the biological target, we'll do better. Um, so I think that there's this scientific value in ensuring that our hypotheses actually match what causally we're trying to do. And that will result in better science and better medicine. And then also, if we ignore these socially constructed categories a little bit and ignore the discrimination and bias that can sometimes play into our thinking, then we'll probably end up with results that, yeah, can reach a broader range of people. Right now, it seems to me that there's a lot of bias in what sort of research projects scientists undertake. Scientists seem like they are sometimes, maybe inadvertently, doing a ton of research on the sorts of medical problems that certain people face and other people don't. So, for example, I think there's a lot of conditions that primarily impact women that we haven't really done enough research on. why is that? Why is it that these conditions that primarily impact women are being left out of our scientific research? Well, I mean, one of the reasons is I think people are creating these socially constructed categories first, and then, they're using bias in doing so. But another reason is just they're not following they're not following the science. So they're saying, well, hormones probably influence, the sorts of hormones that women often have maybe influences medical intervention. So we can't look at women. We can't include women in our research subjects or something like that. Well, I think that's a little bit silly, but if you believe that, then you ought to test it. And if people were to test it, we would get all kinds of precision health advances, I think, maybe in determining how hormone cycles impact medical interventions. So actually following the science, even if you don't care about bias or equity, might lead to greater advances and more medical interventions to help a broader range of people.
Okay, I have two questions left. One
Okay.
is speculative, and then one is more reflective. Speculating, what do you think is the likelihood that a medical scientist or a medical practitioner would come to the bioethics journal and read a PhD in philosophy person talking about their precision health, offering this alternative that would be more work for them, but way better for everyone? Like, what are the chances that this would actually make science better?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In my experience, doctors and scientists are really interested in these questions. You know, they are very, very worried about the lack of diversity in research subjects leading to certain populations being excluded. I went to a talk yesterday at WashU run by a bunch of researchers who were extremely interested in precision health having these inequitable, yes. And a doctor from, this morning emailed me an article on gender inequities in research. So yeah, I think it's almost surprising how much people care about this and want to fix it. I don't know that they always have the tools to fix it. And that's why I think that it's helpful to have philosophy talk and shine a light on these issues, because sometimes doctors see or scientists see the problems, but they don't really know what would be the best way to address the issue. And if I am right that sometimes the sorts of results that they can get are further stigmatizing, like that VBAC calculator, or further exploitive, or further advancing inequity or injustice, then, and they don't mean to, then we have a lot of work to do. So are they going to read my paper? Probably not, but they do care about these issues and they are looking for the answers, and I can go to those talks and email with those doctors and try and be helpful.
Last question. Is there anything you wish you added to this paper, linked in the video description, that's not in the paper, but now you wish you added it? Anything you left out? You can add it now verbally. Um,
Oh, that's a great question. So I mentioned this talk I went to yesterday about precision health, and one of the researchers was describing this phenomenon of HLA alleles and how there's a huge diversity in this area of our genome and across populations, but we don't have enough information about how they look different in different populations. So if we had a better diversity of research subjects, or if we were able to advance more access to this sort of testing from a broader population of people, we would have more information and better precision health. I'm always looking for case studies coming from precision health. And so I'm always asking people this question. So I hope to continue to find more examples. And yeah, I think that there's an opportunity to sort of explore those issues more directly in future research.
Thank you so much. Your UMSL students are so lucky to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it.